we're coming on this cold, dark night. I'm Terry Horlacher, my husband Randy, my deacon Randy, my assistant, and of course, there's not going to ever be a presentation without having our liturgical coordinator, Nathaniel Garrity, do some chanting, so you are in for a major treat towards the end of this tonight. So Michelle and Ayla asked us to talk about Lent in anticipation of Lent. So just like when we gave the presentation last time, it was before Advent, so it's like getting ready to get ready. And so that's what we want to do for you tonight. Now, I know before we get ready to get ready, I got to say thank you for everybody who planted their Christmas wheat and it grew. And even ours grew, and that's only because I let Randy water it, because I would have overwatered it and we would not have had Christmas wheat. But thank you for everyone that sent in their pictures and showing that even that the wheat grew a lot, and also placing it next to the crush set. And I know you've all been wondering, remember we talked about the 40-foot tall straw Yule goat in Gävle, Sweden. What happened to it? Because it doesn't make it very often. In fact, before this one was built, since 1966, 42 of 59 had been destroyed. So what happened to the Gävle goat? Well, there's a betting thing on it. I actually found this online, and you can see as you get closer and closer, it goes up the first Sunday in Advent until the beginning of the year. And you can tell, okay, it kept living, it kept living, it kept living. And then finally, it didn't get burned. But what happened to it? Well, on December 28th, severe winds from Storm Johannes came through Gävle, Sweden, and blew it over. But you notice the odds didn't go to zero at that point, because they still thought this is a major target on its side. So it wasn't really until the goat was taken away that the odds went to zero. So just to let you know, now the actual ratio is 43 of 60 Yule goats have been destroyed. The most recent one after this one was in 2023 when birds ate it. So we have natural disasters taking it over most recently and not being burned. Okay, that's just the update since last November. So let's talk about getting ready to get ready for Lent. This is one of my favorite paintings. It's such a beautiful one when you look at Mary and Jesus gazing into each other's eyes with such love. Both of their gazes are gazes of love. But there's a third character in this image, and that's the little bird that is fluttering above baby Jesus, tied by a little thread to his hand, and the bird's not trying to get away. This is a portrayal of the legend of the bullfinch. You see, the bullfinch was a bird that was brown and white and blue. And then, as the legend goes, at the crucifixion, the bullfinch flew to the cross and attempted to remove the thorns from Jesus' forehead. And that's where the red on his head came from. So this portrayal, this picture, shows Mary and Jesus loving each other, but living under the shadow of the cross from the very beginning, and they're both embracing it. So whenever you see a bullfinch, think of that story and the tradition behind it. So let's walk in some of Jesus' footprints. I'm going to concentrate mostly on what happened to him during the last week of his life. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about his glorified footprints. And then I'm going to turn it over to Nathaniel. So first of all, this is sort of a topographical map of the area. You know, Randy and I have been to the Holy Land 6 times. And what we really want to do tonight is bring the Gospels to life. So when you hear these stories over the next 7 weeks, you'll have a little bit more of an idea of what it actually is. And I'm going to bring in interesting facts that help you understand it more, some of the things behind the gospel. So this is a topographical map, and you look at it. First of all, look at the scale of miles. Very tight situation here, right? I mean, basically you have on the right side Bethany, which is where Jesus is staying with Lazarus and Mary and Martha, and then Bethphage, where he's going to start his journey into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. But look at the whole idea of how big Jerusalem is. It's not very big. In fact, those of you who pray Liturgy of the Hours know it's a city compact, and it really is. The distances, for example, between Gethsemane, where he prayed, and to the upper room in the lower left there, that's just a little bit over a mile. So all these things that transpired were in such short distances. But there's major ups and downs in there. In fact, if you look at to the right side of that map, if you get to Bethphage and you go over that mountain ridge, or over the mountain ridge from the Mount of Olives, you're in the Judean desert. At any point in time during Jesus' passion, he could have gone over that hill and disappeared, and nobody would have ever found him. But yet, he stayed for all of us. So let's start with Palm Sunday. And you know, there's got to be a little animation here, because I got to keep you animated, right? So here's Jesus. He's going to ride the donkey down. He's going to go by Gethsemane, through the Kidron Valley, and up to the Temple Mount. Not a very large distance that he had to travel with that. This is the church that is built on that site where he got on the donkey. I mean, they actually know these sites. It's on that crest of the hill that you saw, and this is where he started his procession into Jerusalem. And this is the inside of the church. To the left of that, you see encased, well, first of all, it's surrounded by a wrought iron grill, and then there's a stone that encases the stone that he stepped on to get up onto the donkey's colt that he rode down to Jerusalem. And there it is. You can see kind of peeking out of there. There is the actual stone itself. So the folks were with him, and they still do this to this day. You can see you're at the top of the crest, and they're coming down, holding their palms, saying, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest, and walking with Jesus down that mountain from the top of the Mount of Olives down into the valley and then up again to Jerusalem. Now, as you come down the hill, the first thing you'll see there on the right is a chapel, and it's called Dulminus Flegit, translates as where Jesus cried. Jesus stopped as he was coming down. Remember, this is Palm Sunday, and he looks over that, and you can see Jerusalem is just to the left, and he cries over Jerusalem, saying, "Oh, Jerusalem, if you know how much I love you, I have tried to gather you like a hen gathers her chicks under her feathers, but you've rejected me." And he knows what's going to happen. This is 33 AD, and he knows in 70 AD, the Romans are going to come in, and they're going to tear stone upon stone, and they're going to totally burn Jerusalem and disrupt it. And he knows that's going to happen because they've rejected him instead of making him the Messiah. So he cries because the Hebrew people are God's people, and Jerusalem is God's place, and the temple is where God lives with his people. And he knows that the temple is going to be pulled down, stone upon stone. This is the church, and if you look at that beautiful window in there, it totally overlooks Jerusalem, and the altar is just in front of that. This was built in the 1920s, kind of the same architect that built a lot of the different churches around there, Antonio Barluzzi, and he was an incredible architect because he could bring structural elements as well as theology into it. So this chapel, this church is shaped like an upside down teardrop, and that's what you're seeing there. This is what the inside of that window looks like. So you're overlooking Jerusalem. And look at the beautiful, beautiful emblem on the front of that. It totally portrays what Jesus said, "Oh, Jerusalem, I wanted to gather you like a hen gathers her little chicks under her wings." But remember, he's not a hen, but they draw him as a rooster. Isn't that incredible? So this is a total reenactment of what actually happened there. And it's such an incredible spot. Now, just outside this church, there are thorn trees. And I want to show you what the crown of thorns look like. These are not thorns like we get when we prick our finger on a thistle or a rose thing. Look at those puppies. They are 4 inches long. These are formidable thorns. These are something that you would not want to wear a crown of thorns from. Now, there's a little bit of a story that goes behind this, and that is when our daughter was with us in 2011, our first pilgrimage to the Holy Land with Bishop Quinn, she knew she was going to enter the convent just a few months later, and she really, really wanted a thorn to say, this is what I'm giving up. And she tried to get one off the tree, and she cut her finger enough that it was bleeding, and she said, "That's a sign. I don't need to have a thorn. I've been injured. I've been wounded like Jesus was. That's fine." And so we gave up that quest. But then 3 years later, Randy and I are back, and our daughter, Sister Agnes, is going to take her first vows. And I said, "I gotta get her one of those thorns," because that's what moms do, right? So while we were waiting to get into the church, because there was another mass going on there, and you saw how that all looks, I thought I would just very quietly and conceitedly go around to the side of that church and start to do that up and down and get myself a thorn. All of a sudden, a man appears with a really big chain that I thought he was going to actually hit me with, and he said, "Madam." And I'm like going, busted. So anyway, he puts this chain up that actually goes around where the trees are with the thorns on them so that nobody can get there anymore. Okay, so that happens. Nobody sees me doing this in my group. I don't know how I was so discreet. Randy will laugh at me about that statement. But so anyway, and this next slide is a reenactment. Anyway, when we finally got into the church, this is what I saw. It was like I was not off to the side as much as I thought. While Mass was being celebrated, they were watching some blonde just going crazy trying to get a thorn for her daughter. So anyway, we took this after the fact, but I had no idea. So we come out, and our group goes like, "Where did this chain come from, and why is it here?" I said, "Well, I got to tell you the story." And they said, "Well, did you get the thorn?" And I said, "No." And then our tour guide said, "I've got a nail clipper." So anyway, our daughter did get her single thorn for her first vows. And Randy and I were there, we were there on October 7th last year, but we didn't get to Jerusalem. But the time before that, now they are actually trimming these trees up so high that even a giraffe can't get at the thorns. So anyway, yeah, it's not going to ever happen again. This is what Jesus was heading for. This is the Golden Gate, the ones that are blocked off, by the way. And it was said that the Messiah would come through these gates because this was the same gate that David came through 1,000 years earlier. And so the Messiah would come back because the Messiah is going to be a descendant of David. So it was known that the Messiah would come through here. So Jesus knew exactly what he was doing, and just like David, he rode on a donkey through that gate. So he came in the same area. That golden dome is the dome of the rock of the Islamic place of worship, but it pretty much marks where, first of all, the place that Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac, and probably was included in where the temple was. So Jews to this day will not go on the Temple Mount because they don't know where the Holy of Holies was, and they can't walk on that. It would be such a sacrilege, but that's right around in that area. So when you see that golden dome, just remember that's probably in the area of the Jewish temple. So you go, well, how did Jesus get through those gates? It's like they're all stoned up. Yeah, they are. Because the Muslims said they knew that the Messiah is going to come from the east, and the Messiah is going to come from the Golden Gate. So if we block it up, then he can't come. I don't think that's going to actually work. So anyway, that's why it's actually bricked off, to try to keep the Messiah from coming through those gates. If you look right before those gates, there's a cemetery there. And that cemetery is of Jewish folks that know that the Messiah is going to come from the east and that he's going to come through those gates, and they want to be in the front row. So it's all consistent. Okay, so let's get to Holy Week now. We're talking, that was all about the Palm Sunday. Now let's talk about what's going to happen with the Triduum. So here's a map of the paths that Jesus and the disciples took through that time, through those last 3 days of his life. They probably came from Bethany because Jesus at least was staying with Lazarus, Martha, and Mary on Holy Thursday to get to the cenacle, the upper room. So here you go. They're going to walk. And they're going to end up in the part of the really old city. That's probably only about not even 0.7 of a mile that they walked to get there. Let's talk a little bit about the Last Supper. This is what's called the cenacle. Now, this is not the room that they ate the Last Supper in, because, Jerusalem's been bulldozed and burned so many times. But this actual room was built by the Franciscans in the 13th century, so it's been there for 800 years on the same site, but it is not the room. And then when the Ottoman Empire took it over, it was turned into a mosque, although they still let Mass be celebrated there once a year, and that's on Holy Thursday. And if you look over on the right side, you can see that shows that it's a mosque because the little niche there is always pointing to how the Islamic faithful would kneel to line up to face Mecca. Okay, so they kind of took every Christian remnant of the place out, except there was one that they missed. And that is the capital of, in the room here, of the pelican feeding her babies. They thought this was a pagan symbol. They didn't realize that, no, the pelican is Jesus, symbolizing how he feeds us with his body and blood, just as a pelican feeds her babies with her body and blood. So this is still there to show how old this site actually is. A little bit about the Jewish Passover. There are 4 glasses of wine drunk at the Jewish Passover. If you really read carefully about all the institution of the Eucharist narratives, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and the earliest one from Paul, you'll see that we hear that the first glass is drunk before everything begins. The second one, before the ceremonial hand washing. The third one is after the meal. And the fourth one is after the major blessing at the end. Paul and Luke both mention the third cup. They say after the meal. That would be when the Eucharist was instituted, when he took the cup and broke the bread. That's what's really incredible, that we kind of know that. But we never, in any of the institutions of the Eucharist, do we hear about the fourth cup until a little bit later. This is from The Chosen. I love this image because it's like, how true was it to what actually happened there? So they finished the meal, and Jesus said, "This is my body, and this is my blood." And then the next line in the Gospels, and Paul is, and they sang a hymn, and then they went out. So they sang the full Hallel blessing, the praise and glory. They got through the meal, they drank the third cup, and they did that, and then they left to go across the Kidron Valley to Gethsemane to pray. When was the fourth cup of wine drunk? Chad?
During the crucifixion.
Yeah, on the cross. So tying together the Eucharist as sacrifice and meal and the Last Supper with that, he drank the fourth cup on the cross. And that is what's like, I get goosebumps even talking about this with you, that all of it was fulfilled. And it's really incredible. And like people have parsed this together and say, there's no evidence of a fourth cup being drank at the Seder dinner. Nope. He finished it all, literally, on the cross.
He actually says it is done.
Yeah. Yep. All right, so they went out, and they went out singing. That's also the only time in Scripture that it talks about Jesus singing. So he's singing the Hallel praises. Think about that. He knows he's going to his death. He's just instituted this great sacrament for us that will be the memorial of that, and he knows that, and he can still go out singing. All right, so they're going to go to Gethsemane and pray there. They've had 3 cups of wine, so you got to almost give them a little credit for being sleepy, right? This is the Church of All Nations, or the Church of Gethsemane, and it's down, so they go down, and then you're going to go across that Kidron Valley and to that. I want to just draw your attention to the olive trees that are there in kind of the left foreground. How old are these trees? This is another thing that's really fun. First of all, I got to just say, we don't know. They're at least 1,000, and they could be 2,000 years old. Why do I say that? Because olive trees aren't like usual trees that have rings in them, so you can't count them. And they hollow out from the inside, so you can't actually know. So they can do some carbon-14 data, but the bottom line is, and I'll just bring this to your attention too, just like our little tree that's out there, if you chop them down, the roots still live, and the roots are older, and they'll sprout up again. So they have been able to do carbon-14 data testing on the oldest of these, and they are 1,000 years old. But they say it's very likely that they are older than that. So the tradition always is, these are from the time of Jesus. We can't prove that, but we can't not prove it. And I love those kind of stories because I love that. But the bottom line is, the 3 that are the oldest all came from the same source. So whoever was protecting this tree replanted them or brought them back, or they were there. And that's what's really incredible. These trees have been protected. So even when the Romans in 70 AD raised everything, that doesn't mean that these same trees didn't sprout back up. Inside this church has the rock that, again, has traditionally been called the one that Jesus prayed upon. And it is a huge rock, and you can see how it's adorned with wrought iron thorns. It is a very, very moving place, and Mass there is held where you sit in like a U shape around this stone. Now, Jesus was there. In Luke's gospel, an angel came to fortify him. You can see in the background there, you've got Peter, James, and John who are asleep. And we don't see the other 9, right? Well, where were they? Remember, he said he took them and they went a little bit away. And there is a cave, which is where he traditionally was taught to teach them, where he had took them and left the rest of them there, and then had Peter, James, and John join him just a little bit away for his real, not my will, but yours. Take this cup away from me, but not my will, but yours. This is what that cave looks like. And it's been there for a long time. And in fact, there was some major flooding that happened back around like 30, 40 years ago, and they found mosaics from the 4th century in there. Remember, Christianity was not like the legal religion until the 4th century, and Jerome himself, St. Jerome, who lived in the 4th century, mentions this cave, and this place was already identified as a place where Jesus would go and pray, and identified as Gethsemane. Okay, Judas arrives, and now they're going to be arrested. So there's a little bit that goes on here. He's got to go back up. There's going to be trial at Caiaphas's house. He's going to stay there until dawn, and then have to go to Pilate, who sends him to Herod, who sends him back to Pilate, and then his passion will start. So it's kind of a 3-hour meal, this Seder dinner. So this arrest probably took place close to midnight. He was interrogated by in the Sanhedrin and all, and then waited till daybreak to be sent to Pilate. This is Caiaphas's house. It's fascinating. The first time Randy and I were there, it's like, why would I want to go see Caiaphas's house? Well, Caiaphas's house was the house of the high priest. It had a jail in it. It was where the whole, original trial went on, and it was also where the church is called St. Peter in Galantru, where the cock crowed. And this is where Peter denied Jesus 3 times. So what happened after the original trial? Well, we had to wait for daybreak. This is what's really incredible. This place is called the Pit. It was the prison in Caiaphas's house. It's a cistern. There's no way in or out of it unless you are lowered in or pulled out. There are no windows, there's no doors, full of vermin and excrement, and maybe even a little bit of water because it's a cistern that would collect there. Jesus spent that night in total darkness after being betrayed by Judas. This is where he spent the evening, bound and in this darkness. Now you say, well, what's that little light over there? Well, that's what's been constructed so we can go down and see it. And just to show you what it looks like from somebody standing up and looking down, this is our little group. So it's a very dark place. So the next morning then, he's brought to Pilate, who says, behold the man. That's the title of this image. And he's condemned to death. And I want to talk and show you about the Via Dolorosa, the last half mile that Jesus walked. And there it is. You can see number 1 up there. That's Antonia Fortress, where Pilate was and where Pilate condemned him. And then you can see in the lower left, that's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Like I said, only about a half mile, but through the winding streets of Jerusalem, through the shops, through the crowds. Let's talk about it. This is the Church of the Flagellation, where Pilate sent him to be whipped. 39 lashes, because it was generally thought that if you are whipped 40 times, you will die. So we're going to give you 39, so it's n-1, so you can still survive the punishment. And in that is a part of that column. This is the lithostratos. You'll hear this written about in John's Gospel, where the soldiers would sit around playing their games, waiting to be given a task to do. And there actually are places in this stone where you can see the carvings from 2,000 years ago where they would play their games. The Franciscans on Friday at 3 o'clock lead Stations of the Cross through the streets of Jerusalem. And they start here. This is now part of the university, but it's the stonework at least, is part of Pilate's Praetorium. So this is the first station where Jesus is condemned to death. And just to show you how narrow the streets are and people walking, and we're praying the rosary during this time in different languages, so it's totally a universal encounter. The second station, or the third station, Jesus falls the first time. If you ever have the possibility of going to the Holy Land, Randy and I'll say, yeah, jump at it. And if you can walk the stations to the cross, you want to do this 2 times. Once in the early morning, which is probably when Jesus was walking it himself, and it's quiet and the stores aren't open. But also, if you can walk it during regular hours, because nearly all of these stations have a chapel associated with them, and you can go in and have a really special private place to pray. So this is Jesus Falls the first time. And this just shows you in this chapel, it's kind of like a hologram where you see Jesus falling for the first time. This one is a sucker punch for me. The 4th station, Jesus meets his mother. And in this is an actual church. It's more than a chapel. And we could not find where the actual place was. And then we thought, that's right. Anything that's really old that they've been maintaining is going to be downstairs. And so Randy and I went downstairs into the church. And there's this beautiful little chapel down there with these tiny little mosaic feet on it of Mary, where Mary stood when she met her son on the way to Calvary. The 5th station is when Simon the Cyrenian comes to help. Interestingly enough, again, say the streets of Jerusalem probably changed over the millennia, right? But in this place, on this 5th station, there is actually an opening to the countryside, or there was. And so it is not impossible that Simon was just coming in from, a night's work and was tagged to go and help Jesus carry the cross. It actually does make sense with where this is located. You notice this old woman putting her hand against this. This is traditionally thought to be a place where Jesus stumbles. He doesn't fall yet, and he puts his hand against the wall to keep himself, and the rock gave way. And so that's his handprint in the wall. And you can see how it's been kind of not plastered over, but plastered around to maintain that site. The 6th station is Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. This is where her house was traditionally thought to be, where she came out. And the little chapel that's, again, in the wall there. Now, the Veronica is one of the major relics of St. Peter's, and they bring it out on the 5th Sunday of Lent and hold that up. So you can see the picture on the left, that's Veronica holding that. That statue's like 30 feet tall, but it doesn't look, they know how to, scale stuff. But they bring that up, see the balcony there, and there they are, bringing out what that image looks like. And this is traditionally what it's been said to be. Now, whether the one in Rome or the one in Montepello, Italy, is the original, I'm not going to get into that dispute, but the face of Jesus. The 7th station is Jesus Falls for the 2nd time. And again, just you can see how this is part of the street. I mean, people have their produce there. Jesus would have been walking, carrying at least the crossbar of his cross. The 8th station is where Jesus meets the women of Jerusalem. And there's no chapel with this one, but you see there's that arrow there. So what's on that the little rock below it? If you look really hard, above the horizontal bar of the cross, it's the 2 symbols in Greek for Jesus Christ. And then below it, it says N-I-K-A, Nika. So it's Jesus Christ Victor, right there. This is the 9th station of the cross, where he falls a 3rd time. And that the column there is from that original time of Jesus, and it's just embedded in the current wall. So it shows you how old these places are. So Jesus falls a 3rd time. Now, amazingly, I showed you how closed in all the things are. You come past this, and then all of a sudden, you turn a corner, and you're in the plaza of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This church has stood since the 10th or 11th century. There were several ones before that. The first one was built by Constantine in the early 4th century. So this is probably one of the oldest churches that has been standing for all that. Just to show you how old this is. See that ladder up there? Do you guys know about that ladder? It's pretty funny. There are so many churches that say they have part of the skin in this church and the ruling of it, that nobody can do anything without getting the permission of another one. And so, I'm not kidding you guys. In the 1700s, some workman put a ladder up there to probably clean the windows, and then that ladder wasn't supposed to be there, but nobody could agree that we should remove it. So it's made of the cedar of Lebanon, which is why it probably still is there for 250 years, despite being out in the elements all this time. But this just shows you kind of the politics of what goes on in the Holy Land. So the 10th station is Jesus is stripped of his garments. This is in that, I'll just go back one. On the right hand, it's entered from the stairs there. You go up, and that chapel, that station is there. Now we're going to go into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre itself. These are the stairs to Calvary, and you can't imagine what it's like to walk those. It's steep, and it's meaningful, and it takes your breath away as you go up them. This is what it looks like as you first come out of that arch up above. On the right, you have Jesus is nailed to the cross. As you go forward more to the left, it's Calvary itself. So this is the 11th station. Jesus is nailed to the cross. This chapel is actually run by the Franciscans, so if you are lucky enough to have a Catholic priest with you, he can celebrate Mass there on Calvary. That's where we have some praying rites. And this is Calvary, run by the Greek Orthodox Church. So what do we have? The altar is over the site where the cross stood in the ground. And I'll show you a close-up, but under that altar, under the stone that encases it, you can actually put your hand down and touch the stone that held the cross. On either side, encased by those lucite boxes, for lack of a better term, that's the rock of Calvary also. And then behind, you have life-sized icons of Mary on the left and John on the right, and Jesus, of course, in the middle, at the foot of the cross. This is the altar, and you can actually, so look under that, you can see the picture of Jesus, the Ecce Homo, behold the man, and there's the silver circle that you put your hand in, and you can touch the rock that held the cross. So the 13th station, Jesus is taken down from the cross. Not surprisingly, this is in front of an altar of Mary, Our Lady of Sorrows. So that's just to the right of what we just looked at. This is what's called the stone of the anointing. It's where they brought Jesus to put the herbs and wrap him before they laid him in the Holy Sepulchre. And so this is just outside of just down from Calvary. Calvary's up. Now we've come down to the level ground where the tomb is. And this is where he's anointed. And the next thing is, let's place him in the tomb. And this is the Holy Sepulchre. It has been, what's the word I want? Looked at, restored. It's incredible. They found things they didn't know were underneath different layers in the last 5 years, and it's incredible. So as you go in, now you think, it's supposed to be a cave, right? Well, Constantine was an engineer. So what's he going to do? He wants to give everybody access to this. So you've got a cave in the side. He's going to excavate all around it. So he's going to actually create the outside walls of the tomb, but the inside walls are the ones that remain. And the first part of that is what's called the Chapel of the Angel. This is where the angel appeared and said, he's not here. And in that little table there, there's a picture or a fraction of the stone that was rolled in front of the tomb. And this is the Holy Sepulchre itself. I tell you, the first 3 times that I was in there, I could not remember anything about it except that it had golden light. You don't know. You walk in there and you think, this is it. This is where he was. But likewise, when I tried to pray the rosary outside of the Holy Sepulchre, I tried to pray the sorrowful mysteries, and I could not do it. And it was only when I realized, wait, I'm supposed to be celebrating the empty tomb, that Jesus is risen. And so when I did the glorious mysteries, then it worked. But this is such an incredible place to be in, to touch that. You know, the actual stone is encased with the marble that you see there, but to touch that stone. This is called the Chapel of the Apparition. It's said this is where Jesus appeared to Mary, or let Mary know that he was risen, because how could anybody whose heart beat together for 9 months and who so conformed their will to each other not know that that had happened? So whether Jesus actually appeared to her or let her know, or she just knew, this is kind of a reference to that Mary is celebrating Jesus' resurrection. There's also one very nearby called the Chapel of Mary Magdalene, where you remember in the garden, so Mary's totally sad. She goes there in the morning, and the tomb's empty, and she runs. And then Peter, and she tells them, they've taken the Lord. I don't know where he is. And then Peter and John race back, and then they see the empty tomb. Well, Mary circles back too, and she's still crying there. And the gardener comes up to her, and it's Jesus, but she doesn't recognize him. And she says, "Sir, do you know where they've taken my Lord?" And she just goes, "Just let me know." And finally, he refers to her by name. When he calls her Mary, she can see that it's him. And so then she runs back to tell the apostles, "I have seen the Lord, he's risen." This is a really, really big event, because in those times, women were not credible witnesses. So to have a woman be the first witness of the resurrection, if you were writing the Iliad or the Odyssey, you would never have Mary Magdalene be the first one that says he's risen. But it just shows you how these truths are, how God works outside of what you think it's supposed to be. And so she's the first one, and she's called the apostle to the apostles, because she's the one that saw and believed. And then we're talking about footprints, so I got to end with the last footprints that Jesus had on earth. He takes them out to Bethany, and he's going to ascend into heaven. So this is it's now a mosque. It was the Chapel of the Ascension. It's now a mosque, and we're there, and we're all reenacting, "Men of Galilee, why are you looking up? He's going to come back." But inside, there isn't the actual last right footprint of him as he ascended into heaven. So that's Jesus's last footprint on earth, whether it's in his first body or his glorified body. They say whether the disciples chiseled that themselves or whether Jesus made it as he was lifting off, we just don't know. But that's why it's a special place to go. Now, we're going to switch gears. Going to turn this over to Nathaniel here in about a few minutes. The solemn reproaches. Who of you guys remember these? This was mostly pre-Vatican II, although I was a member of St. Pius Parish from when I was born in '59 to when our kids came here 30 years later for formation. So the reproaches are incredible. They basically are sung between two sides of the choir or a cantor, and they're talking about how much Jesus God has taken care of us and how we have repeatedly rejected him. I think that the big thing that I want to just read to you is the opening prayer there, and these are done during the adoration of the cross. So after the cross has been unveiled, as the priest comes forward and says, "Behold the wood of the cross," say, "My people, what have I done to you? How have I offended you? Answer me." It really is a very haunting and sorrowful prayers that go, and there are 12 of them in total. Nathaniel's going to do one of the first 3 and then 2 of the last 9. The first one's going to end with what we call the thrice holy hymn, which is what ends the first 3. They alternate in Greek and Latin. It shows you how far back these go. These are from the 9th century. They go back a long way. And they also show how we honor the Trinity, because remember we say every Mass, holy, holy, holy. That's what we're saying with this, holy, holy, holy. So we unite heaven and earth by doing that, and then just to show this is also part of the concluding prayer for the Divine Mercy Chaplet. And I'm going to turn this over to Nathaniel. Sin. And they end just as the original reproach started. "Oh my God," or "Oh my people, what have I done to you? How have I offended you? Answer me." I think you should come up here. We need to hear your voice more. Come on up. So Nathaniel has, like I said, there were the first 3. He did the third one. He's going to do 8 and 9 of the last one.
Ego dediti sceptrum regale, et tu dedisti capiti meo, spineam coronam, popule meus, quid feci tibi, aut in quo contristaviti te, responde mi. Ego te exaltavi magna virtute, et tu me suspendisti in patibulo crucis. Popule meus, quid feci tibi, aut in quo contristavi te, responde mi.
Does that come back to anybody's memory from years ago? We've made copies for you. They're on the table right by the baptismal font there if you want one. If we run out, I'll make more and have them out on the table. But at this point, we'd like to just conclude with something. The reproaches you can see, it's like when you say, my people, what have I done to you? How have I offended you? Answer me. It sounds like you're kind of like this, but that's not the way the chant is. It's so very sad. How have I offended you? Just answer me. I love you so much. I've done all this for you. How have I offended you? Answer me. So we're going to end. Deacon Randy is going to read a homily from ancient times. This is, if you pray the Liturgy of the Hours, what we read on Holy Saturday morning, where what happens between Good Friday and Easter, what's happening in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, anticipating Jesus' resurrection. Randy?
What is happening? Today, there is a great silence over the earth, a great silence and stillness, a great silence because the King sleeps. The earth was in terror and was still because God slept in the flesh and raised up those who were sleeping from the ages. God has died in the flesh, and the underworld has trembled. Truly, he goes to seek out our first parent like a lost sheep. He wishes to visit those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death. He goes to free the prisoner Adam and his fellow prisoner Eve from their pains. He who is God and Adam's son. The Lord goes into them holding his victorious weapon, his cross. When Adam, the first created man, sees him, he strikes his breast in terror and calls out to all, "My Lord be with you all." And Christ in reply says to Adam, "And with your spirit." And grasping his hand, he raises him up, saying, "Awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give you light. I am your God, who for your sake became your son, who for you and your descendants now speak and command with authority those in prison. Come forth, and those in darkness have light, and those who sleep rise. I command you, awake, sleeper, I have not made you to be held a prisoner in the underworld. Arise from the dead. I am the life of the dead. Arise, O man, work of my hands. Arise, you who were fashioned in my image. Rise, let us go hence, for you and me, and I in you. Together we are one undivided person. For you, I, your God, became your son. For you, I, the master, took on your form, that of slave. For you, I, who am above the heavens, came on earth and under the earth. For you, man, I became as a man without help, free among the dead. For you, who left a garden, I was handed over to Jews from a garden and crucified in a garden. Look at the spittle on my face, which I received because of you, in order to restore you to that first divine inbreathing at creation. See the blows on my cheeks, which I accepted in order to refashion your distorted form to my own image. See the scourging of my back, which I accepted in order to disperse the load of your sins, which was laid upon your back. See my hands nailed to the tree for a good purpose, for you who stretched out your hand to the tree for an evil one. I slept on the cross, and a sword pierced my side, for you who slept in paradise and brought forth Eve from your side. My side healed the pain of your side. My sleep will release you from your sleep in Hades. My sword has checked the sword which was turned against you. But arise, let us go hence. The enemy brought you out of the land of paradise. I will reinstate you, no longer in paradise, but on the throne of heaven. I denied you the tree of life, which is a figure, but now I myself am united to you, I who am life. I posted the cherubim to guard you as they would slaves. Now I make the cherubim worship you as they would God. The cherubim throne has been prepared. The bearers are ready and waiting. The bridal chamber is in order. The food is provided. The everlasting houses and rooms are in readiness. The treasures of good things have been opened. The kingdom of heaven has been prepared before the ages. And we'll conclude in prayer. Almighty, ever-living God, whose only begotten Son descended to the realm of the dead and rose from there to glory, grant that your faithful people who were buried with him in baptism may, by his resurrection, obtain eternal life. We make our prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.